You know what they say, the more the merrier.
The story begins with who's gonna win, knowing the danger that lies within. A boy at the ark, a genius at heart, wanting to unlock the mysteries of life.
You know, it's a funny thing. I've always kept my eye on Sonic to some degree, and even more so within the past few years. What with the introduction of the movies of Sonic, the newer games, and I've recently been getting into the IDW comics featuring the Blue Blur. I mean, obviously considering that I've been doing more videos where I bring up the franchise, I think my interest has been somewhat reignited. Granted, I've been burned out for quite a while ever since. And it's not helped by people who obviously painted the series in a more negative light than it needed to be for the sake of profit and quote-unquote jokes. I was burned from the series for this at least for a decade. Looking back and playing some of the older titles during that time frame, I honestly regret my thought process that I had for years. As a critic and analyzer of media, the last thing I should do is allow other people's opinions, whether or not I like the person in question, color my opinion on what they cover. That is the rut of the issues of our online space nowadays, isn't it? There's so much media nowadays that it's almost impossible to cover it all and make videos about it, so sometimes you have to go to other people's opinions to get your thoughts on stuff. Like, I still have plans to cover Puss in Boots, Kamen Rider Geats, and Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc V in the first quarter of this year. So, you may be wondering, why am I talking about Dr. Eggman? I mean, Sonic Frontiers is a few months old at this point, the third Sonic movie isn't going to be out for a long time, and I'm not really aware of anything new coming out for this franchise.
Ultimate victory.
As a YouTuber, I shouldn't be talking about a specific character like this, but my brain and heart is telling me otherwise. This video will talk about the few versions of Eggman, his origins, and why I think Eggman is actually a pretty interesting villain in concept, but has a few issues when it comes to implementation. Hi, I'm MangaKamen, and let's begin. Let's start with some origins of Eggman. Did you guys know that Eggman was originally supposed to be the main character in the Sonic franchise?
Hey yo, what the fuck?
It's true, back in 1990, when Sega requested a game to make a mascot to rival Nintendo's Mario, this concept was introduced. Prior to this, Alex Kidd was Sega's mascot, but due to the fact that there was a bit too much of a resemblance to that of Mario, they had to go with something else, because, you know, they didn't want to be compared all the time. Oh, you poor, sweet, innocent childs. One of the concepts was this mustachio man in pajamas who, funnily enough, was touted to have a resemblance to Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, I guess? Funnily enough, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but Naoto Oshima, the original designer for Sonic, decided to go with the hedgehog due to the fact that when he went to Central Park in New York City and asked the people in there for their opinions on character designs, it just so happened that a certain blue hedgehog character was a favorite to the locals. It should be noted that this is actually a pretty interesting origin for Eggman's character concept. Not only does it establish that there was a bit of a rivalry for the character design and Sega's mascot for it, but also showed that Sonic was a clear favorite. I bring this up as it helps establish a bit of a precedent for both Sonic and Eggman's character dynamic, even in the recent game of Frontiers. Eggman describes Sonic as a worthy adversary, despite him hating Sonic. I might be reading a bit too much in this because I highly doubt this was planned over 30 years ago, but it's fun to look back and read into things that were established in a more modern outlook. As development for the first Sonic game was underway, Eggman's design was used for the villain because it was easy for kids to draw and was given a more rounder shape to do so. According to the development team, they also wanted to make a character who was the opposite of Sonic, a character who was a representation of machines in development. It was that whole idea of nature versus technology that we see in a lot of games and media regarding Sonic. It's at this point that there was a bit of an oddity going on with Eggman, or as a lot of Americans knew him at the time, Dr. Robotnik. The name Dr. Robotnik was a name that was decided by Sega of America mainly because they didn't have access to the established Japanese materials of the first game. The name is now canon, but as was explained in an article from 2016, Eggman became a nickname for the character as established in the Sonic Adventure series. Now, I'm not sure if we'll talk about the actual origin of Robotnik in a canon sense, because that's a bit of a can of worms there, or whatever you consider canon in the Sonic universe, since apparently there's a thing called the Sonic Bible, and it's gone through a number of revisions and such. But whatever, this is a fun video and I felt like talking about Eggman's origin.
I plan to give you a taste of my revenge once all the 7 Chaos Emeralds are collected. Once I initiate this program, it cannot be disabled. All of you ungrateful humans who took everything away from me will feel my loss and despair.
I think I'm not saying anything too out there, but one of the most interesting elements of Eggman and Sonic are their character dynamics with each other. I believe you guys remember when I brought up how Robotnik was designed to be the polar opposite of Sonic. Well, that really goes as far as their personalities too, and it's a diametric opposition, which if you ask me is exactly what makes a good key villain for there to be a direct opposition to the main hero, whether it be personality, abilities, or even their ideals. Obviously, keeping with Sonic and Eggman, some of the character traits that Sonic has is that he tends to be very impulsive, and in Eggman's personality, he tends to be a bit more of a master planner. Sonic tends to be very protective and values his friends, meanwhile Eggman tends to be more selfish as a character, doing what he can to get ahead, even sacrificing his own creations to do so. There's also the man versus nature aspect to consider too. Eggman's affinity to machines and turning living creatures into robots, or putting them into machines, and Sonic obviously destroying those very machines to save the home that he always known. I do like to point out that while the two characters are polar opposites to each other, that isn't just their defining traits. While it's good to have elements of opposition to each other that make them adversaries, they do need to have more than that to be their own characters. It also really depends on the iteration you're looking at. Take for example the animated series Sonic Sat AM. Robotnik could be intimidating and sneaky with the other characters in the show. Like, you really get the vibes of a tyrannical emperor who's a real threat that can back up his words to fight. Or if you also want more intimidation, look towards the more recent IDW comics. You can see a similar trend of him being very competent. Plus, hey, the artwork for Eggman here is very stylized, and that smell just makes him look very menacing. The use of negative space builds up a very intimidating atmosphere, all the while the smile and glasses of Eggman get accented. It really plays into the idea of a psycho who's also a genius. Even going back to the older comics, Eggman is a very, very dangerous man. He often holds back just because his goals are self-serving and ego-driven. However, he is still extremely dangerous. The Mobians even bring up how his tech is so advanced now that we can even reverse engineer it or figure out how to repair it. He's just on a different level in that regard. He also learns from his mistakes. The thing is, Eggman has the power to destroy the world if he wanted to, but that's not really his goal. If we continue looking at the comic storyline involving the Metal Virus, a virus that essentially turned all living creatures into machines via the zombie effect, he'd be affected too. Hell, he could just destroy the world with all his firepower or let that whole thing go on and he was just a mad destruction. But his goal isn't destruction, it's control. To control the world, you still need a world, and you still need to have people in it to control as well. So in a sense, he's holding back, as we see in some clips like this.
Those idiots! They're destroying everything! How can I take over the city and build the Eggman Empire if there is no city? I'm at my limit. I have no choice! Send in the Eggman fleet! Charge!
In general, Eggman has tended to be a very entertaining villain. He is good at being bad, but still has his human elements to him as well. He knows when to swallow his pride in order to make sure that there's still a world for him to take over. Take, for example, Sonic Adventure 2. Despite being the key players in the events that are leading up to the essential doomsday with the Ark being brought down upon the Earth, Eggman was willing to put his differences aside with the good guys to help save the world from destruction. And this is after he holds Amy at gunpoint as a hostage.
Get the fuck out or I'm gonna shoot Amy in the fucking face! I swear to God! I'll do it, you bitch! Get out!
We also learn more about his origins and how his inspiration was his grandfather. I've already covered a number of things in my video about villains and Eggman's time in Sonic Frontiers, but to summarize what I said there, he grew to appreciate Sage like a daughter and became more of a humanized version of himself, even becoming almost like a father to her in that regard. It was intriguing, and we also got audio logs that also expanded upon his character. Things such as saying that Tails was a great intellect that he thinks is wasted being with Sonic, or touching on a missed opportunity in Sonic Adventure 2 since his cousin Maria was the one who was Shadow's motive for doing what he did. I will say this because if you consider a lot of the other villains in the series of Sonic, yeah, Eggman is evil, but he isn't an idiot. Most of the time. Like, I'm not saying the guy's gonna be getting a Nobel Peace Prize, and he's clearly an antagonist, but he was pure evil and wanted to destroy things. He wouldn't help in the aid of stopping the Ark or being convinced by Sage to help Sonic either. It helps that unlike other villains in the series that are like that don't really have a lot to them other than destruction! Don't get me wrong, watching the world burn villains have their appeal, but if that's all they got to them and they don't have an actual character or chemistry with them the other characters, they tend to be rather bland, boring, and forgettable. You have to take the joke Joker effect here because, yeah, Joker from The Dark Knight, he wanted to watch society burn, but he was still very entertaining and he had a personality. The same thing is akin to like Eggman here. There is a lot of potential with Eggman as a villain and character, and I hope that in future Sonic games they flesh him out with the same manner that they did in Frontiers.
Father?
That's my girl.
I say this because we need to talk about some of the flaws with Dr. Eggman's writing.
Is this a towel?
What am I supposed to cover with that? Are you making fun of me?
Looking online about the Sonic debate, there's always been this little concern about Eggman as a villain. Hell, there's even a video that talks about this topic that has well over 1 million views and how the good doctor has become a joke of a character over the years. In some iterations, I can agree. Now, if you've been around my channel for a while, you all know I love talking about villains and writing concepts. Characters like Virgil from Devil May Cry 3, Senator Armstrong from Metal Gear Rising, and various other characters who are villainous, and how I feel like some of them are done well and others are done poorly. Looking at you, Lysanderoth.
King Dragon sends his regards.
I bring this up because one of the factors from what I've been seeing concerning why Eggman has become a contentious villain status is because he's become less threatening and more of a joke in some iterations. I'll talk about this later, but I think we should talk about the issues concerning Eggman as such. Throughout the boost era of Sonic, there's been a bit of an issue with the writing of villain. I brought this up a little bit about how some of them are really one note or are just massive weapons of mass destruction. But Eggman has a different problem. Since he is the central villain, he tends to be in the forefront of a lot of narratives. As such, he too gets a lot of one-dimensional writing weaknesses as well. This can range from a few different things, like having weak cutscene dialogue in Sonic Colors, or generations where his screen time is limited. Now, I'm sure there's a lot of other scenes that people will bring up to counter this, especially in this era. Like, Sonic Forces actually has Eggman succeeding in his plans to take over the world, capture Sonic, and torture him for about 6 months. Then again, it's Sonic Forces, I don't think I need to say too much about that game.
Sonic, help me!
Look how they massacred my boy.
Here's the thing though, it's kind of weird to me because a lot of people will talk about how menacing Eggman has been. They'll reference stuff like Sad AM or the comics. Hell, I did it myself in this very video. And don't get me wrong, both iterations of the character do represent the darker sides of the character, but they do still have their humor signs, even if it's dark humor. Eggman from the beginning of the series has always been set to be a comical character. That's why we went over his initial design and showed that it was more goofy than anything else. And again, it was made so that way kids could easily draw him. All of his major inventions also have egg in their name. Not exactly something that would, instill fear into a person's head. To me, it's not so much a matter of whether or not a villain is comical or if they're super serious though. Both kinds of villains can work really well. The problem is the execution of the writing for the character. Let's do a bit of comparison for fun. In Sonic Adventure 2, Eggman literally has Amy at gunpoint as a hostage, and then throws Sonic out into space. Subsequently, after that, everyone thinks Sonic is dead, at least for about 10 minutes. It's a serious scene that, admittedly, is undercut by the presentation with the music overpowering the scene, the voice acting, and some of the facial expressions, but still paints Eggman as a very serious threat to the crew. And if you look towards Eggman and Sonic Forces, well, people thought Sonic was dead, but was actually imprisoned and tortured for 6 months. And what happens when Sonic gets out?
Yes, they found out I escaped. Oh well, time to kiss this yawn fest goodbye. Oh, we're off planet. I guess anyone who crosses Eggman gets a one-way trip to space. I don't do well in tight spaces. I'll pay back Eggman for putting me in this jam later.
Gee, I can totally tell that he's been tortured by Eggman, so much so that I'm stuck listening to Sonic's podcast. Yay! Characters in and of themselves are fun. They're fun to watch, they're fun to listen to, and they're fun to see what they do. But we also need to consider how the characters interact and react to other characters for these sorts of writing ideas. You've got a character who's taking over the world, and now he's just painted as a minor pain. And most of the time, it's done in order to push the new bad guy in the process, who's probably not going to show up in the next game. There's nothing wrong with having a new villain in your series, and still having the recurring villain show up. That's essentially Legend of Zelda's bread and butter with a ton of its villains. There's a reason why Hijacked by Ganon is a trope, for better or for worse. So, what's the difference here? Well, for one thing, Ganon isn't made into a huge joke. And I'm not talking about Sonic mocking Eggman. That's literally a part of Sonic's character, or when Eggman loses and he's acting like a buffoon. It's more when he acts like a buffoon before he loses and makes mistakes because of it. I think that's why a lot of people really do appreciate Eggman in the comics. Yeah, he's got his more comical moments even in that, but he's still a serious villain. Just look at some of the pages from IDW where he is in the shadows and it's just plain creepy. Essentially, it's a matter of time and place. I love comedy. I don't think you're gonna find someone who doesn't really like it. But comedy is a tool that needs to be used responsibly and shouldn't be used to undercut a villain's ferocity. That's not to say you can't have a comedic villain and make it work. Again, just look towards Jim Carrey's rendition of Eggman in the Sonic films. He's a straight-up ham, but he still acts as a threat. An eccentric threat who likes goat milk, but is still a threat. Really, it all comes down to what you consider to be a good or bad villain, and what your personal tastes are when it comes to antagonists in media. That's the right now, isn't it?
Wait, Shadow! I'm the one who should be telling them the end is near, not you!
When you consider video games as a whole, especially when it comes to stories and villains, you need to consider versatility and motives for the characters, especially when you talk about motivations, in particular on what they're doing. I'm not going to downplay other villains in this section, but Eggman has a lot of potential and versatility as a villain, helped by the fact that he actually does manage to succeed in his goals at times. I say this as one of Eggman's more common goals was to make an amusement park in his image, and a number of games he does manage to pull it off. He does manage to take over the world, he takes over the planet of the Wisps to power his amusement park. He does have a degree of success, it's just that Sonic just comes around and, you know, screws it up. There's also his personality. We went over how his comedy and serious nature can be done and sometimes be messed up. It's less than stellar, but his transition between being goofy, serious, or even teaming up with the heroes for his own preservation, not to mention he does have his narcissism to fall back on, does make me think about him as a character. I mean, the guy can back up his ego. Have you seen the big machines he's able to make? Totally not for compensation.
Are you making fun of me?
In the games, he can be very heartless. Like in Sonic CD, Eggman just straight up ditches Metal Sonic, and it's not a one-time occurrence. Even though Metal is good at his job, he's just a tool to be used by the bad doctor. Eggman's also been shown to throw away countless innocent lives for his own ends, and without remorse. You can see this in various games, the comics, yada yada yada. I think what works for Eggman as a main villain is that when you think about it, he's a relatively normal guy. Aside from his enormous intellect, the guy isn't some super powered being like a lot of the one-off villains. Sure, he'll use those one-off villains, but only to further his own desires. Sometimes it blows up in his face, but hey, that's what you get when you mess with cans of evil. When you really think about it, it's very impressive that Eggman is capable of going toe-to-toe with a creature that can go super fast using whatever tools and wit that he has at his fingers. Frankly, as a character, Eggman's core is interesting, and unlike, say, Bowser we see in the Sonic series, we see how fast, effective, and violent Eggman is capable of being when taking over when Sonic isn't there. Personally speaking, I like the various takes on Eggman, whether it be more lighthearted versions, the darker versions, or even a combination of the two. In the more animated adventures, he tend to be a bit more lighthearted. Most of the time. Dr. Eggman can be an effective villain. It's just that sometimes the writing for him in the games tends to be a bit lackluster. That's due to either downplaying him to make room for one of the one-off villains, undercutting him for comedic effect, or even just how it becomes so tiresome. There was even a time where Eggman kept on releasing ancient evils or the like just to fulfill his plans, and I found that tiresome because it kept happening the same number of times. Learn from your mistakes, man! Then again, I'm spending God knows how many minutes of my life thinking about Sonic games and writing about this character for a script. I don't even know if I'd call Eggman a terrible villain or not at this point, because there's just been so much content involving him that contradicts and supports what I'm saying. I think at the end of the day, it's a tough call on what you consider to be a good or bad villain, as well as which medium you're referring to when it comes to this character. Regardless, I think as a foil to Sonic, Eggman is probably the best villain that Sonic can have. And like the games he's in, Eggman can be great, or he can be complete garbage. It just so happens that the latest version that I've played, Frontiers, seems to put him in a more humane light, which I do enjoy. And I hope they continue that. I gotta say, Eggman is probably one of the more iconic villains in gaming, not only for the fact that he was one of the earliest ones, but due to the fact that he's always been a very flexible villain. He can be comical, he can be a serious threat, he can be messily written, good portion of the time, but he's always been around. He's been in every Sonic game since the series' inception. It's on par with Bowser, Dr. Wily, or Ganon, but what I think makes Eggman stand out from those is he has such a different personality from those three. He's not as serious most of the time, even though he can be. It could be because Eggman's gotten a ton of exposure over the years. I don't know. And I guess I want to turn to you guys, because what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments down below. Whether it be the games, the comics, or the animations, I think we can all agree that Eggman is an entertaining villain. And if you can't come up with a comment, then put in the comments, "Get a load of this!" Eggman is an entertainment. Whether his entertainment value is intentional or not, well, we'll find out eventually. In any case, I'm MangaKamen. Thanks for watching. Until next time, my friends.
Reach for the sky, boy.